You are listening to Hilary Topper on Air, the small business podcast to help you grow both personally and professionally. And now, here's your host, Hilary Topper.
Get stronger, smarter, and faster with the Bible of the triathlon sport. I'm Hilary Topper, and this is Hilary Topper on Air, the Endurance Sports Edition. Today, we're delving into the Triathletes Training Bible, now in its 5th edition, penned by legendary Joe Friel. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hi, Hilary. Thank you for having me on.
Your book has hailed as the go-to resource for triathletes of all levels, with over 150,000 copies sold. Can you tell us what inspired you to create this comprehensive training guide and what changes every year?
It hasn't changed every year. About every 5 years or so, I update the book. And long story short, I wrote this back first time in 1997. That was the first edition. And it came about basically because I'd gotten sick. And I had all of a sudden I had 15 hours where I couldn't train because of this. I actually had a heart ailment. And viral myocarditis, it's called. It's an inflammation of the heart. And my doctor, my cardiologist, told me don't train until the symptoms are gone, then they'll usually go away. But all of a sudden I had like 15 hours a week of nothing to do since I'm not training anymore. So I contacted a publisher who had been after me to write a book. I kept telling them no, I couldn't write it, didn't have time, I was too busy. So now all of a sudden I had lots of time, so I said, I'll write the book now. So I figured it'll sell maybe in 1,000 or 2,000 copies, and that'd be the end of it. But at least I would have had a chance to record what I thought about training. So I wrote the book, and the first month it sold several thousand copies, and I was like blown away. And it's still hanging in there, still selling around the world. I think it's like in about 8 languages now around the world. And it just keeps going and going and going. So I'm very pleased with the book, to say the least. And I never thought it would be around 27 years later, but here it is.
That's awesome. Very, very cool. Well, congratulations to you. That's huge. So what could readers expect from the 5th edition of the Triathletes Training Bible, and how does that differ from the previous versions?
Yeah, every time as I said, the first edition was 1997, and then I came about 2017, I think it was. I decided it was time to do a complete rewrite. I'd already revised it like 3 times or 2 times since the original, and they were significant updates, but they weren't the entire thing. So in 2017 or 18, whenever that was, I decided to throw away the entire book and start from scratch. So I wrote an entirely new book. That came out in 2018, hit the market, and it's still doing well, but things in sport change almost monthly. There's something always going on, a new idea, whatever. And so I decided to update it here this past year and went through some of the things I thought had to change. One of the things that hadn't changed since day one was intensity zones. How hard should you work out based on heart rate or power or pace, speed, those sorts of things. So that was the first thing I realized I had to change or update it. And so I made it more user-friendly. People have been telling me for years, it seemed like zone 1 for heart rate, for example, zone 1 was, the upper end was too hard. And probably there'd been a dozen or so athletes tell me that. And you start getting that many people saying the same thing, you have to kind of like realize maybe they've got a point there. So I went back and took a look at it and decided they were right. So I changed my zones, how to set them up. I changed how you set your zones to begin with. You can do it in different ways. You can use what I normally use, which is what we call an FTP test, 20-minute test all out to find your heart rate zones. Or you could use your max heart rate. or you could use lactate threshold and lactate testing to find your zones. So I'm trying to make it more user-friendly, so you can pick out how you want to set your zones rather than having only one way. Did the same thing with cycling. Swimming stayed the same. I never have gotten a single comment that said that swimming zones could be improved, and that's been a long time. So I've kept it the same, and it changed. But the other two, bike and run, the zones have changed. That was the first big change I made. Beyond that, the changes were less significant. But for example, I decided to include more about aerobic endurance in this edition. I've talked about aerobic endurance as being significant and important for training, but this chapter this copy rather, I really dug deep into it. And why is it so important for you in terms of training? Why is it good to build a big aerobic system? So into that, and that embodied things like heart rate variability, and just so things began to multiply after I had a couple of things going, or they began to move into other areas that are related. And so I make a lot of other changes too. So bottom line is there's been a lot of changes, but they're not an entire book been changed. I've changed just a number of significant things throughout the book.
Thank you for letting me know about that. And what do you hope readers will take away from the Triathletes Training Bible, and how do you envision it impacting their journey in the sport?
Well, I think in this newest edition, one of the things I just mentioned is so critical that I'm afraid we don't often pay enough attention to it. We take it for granted, which is aerobic endurance. For many years, I've noticed that athletes really don't. They kind of put down the idea that we need to train slow, which is really what aerobic endurance is training slowly, zones 1 and 2. And most athletes assume that's too easy for them. They're much better than that, so they need to train at least zone 3. And as soon as you start moving up the intensity zones, you begin to change things about how your body responds. It doesn't burn fat so much anymore, for example, starts burning more carbohydrate. And that's not a good thing. You really want your body burning fat for fuel as its primary source. And things like how your heart responds to exercise is critical also. And that comes out of having done a lot of aerobic endurance training, and the upper zones don't do as much for it. So anyway, there's just a lot of things that happen. And that's the first thing I'd like to see that people become aware of, is that they need to be much more concerned with their aerobic endurance and don't put it down as being beneath their dignity to train slowly. I've told athletes in the past that I've coached, trying to get them to go out and train slowly is one of the most difficult things you run into. I've often told them in a joking fashion, what they really should do is, if you're really kind of embarrassed by going so slow, just put a paper bag over your head so nobody recognizes you, and then go really slowly.
That's great.
I know they won't, but that's the idea. It's so slow, it's embarrassing for most athletes.
Yeah, maybe they should go off of Strava.
Yeah, that's right. You're right.
Okay, before we move on, I just have to say I'm so appreciative of our sponsor and must take the time out to thank them. Please support our sponsor and tell them that they heard about them on Hilary Topper on Air. Special thanks to Plate Tri, Swim, Bike, Run, a retail and online bike shop, and multi-sport specialist. Now back to you, Joe. So the Triathletes Training Bible covers a wide range of topics, from swim, bike, run workouts to nutrition and strength. How do you recommend athletes prioritize these elements in their training regimen?
The first thing I start the first chapter is about the mental of triathlon. And I really think that's probably the most important thing that can really start to develop, is what's going on between their ears when they're training, and especially when they're racing. I've coached lots of athletes, and over the years I've run into many athletes who don't really have that worked out. They don't understand what needs to be done mentally to become a good athlete. And on race day, they begin to fall apart mentally. they begin to doubt themselves. And when they begin to doubt yourself and you see others as being better than you, and you're really not going to do very well after all because of all, just everybody's so much faster than you are as you look around the starting line. That's the sort of thing where people kind of browbeat themselves and assume they're not as good as they really are. And so I've spent some time talking with athletes in that first chapter about making sure they pay attention to what's going on mentally. It's not all just physical. It's also how you assume how you become who you are. And there's lots of ways you can do you can go about improving your mental aspect of the sport.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit. This happens more times than not where triathletes are struggling to stay motivated and maintain consistency. I see it all the time. What would your advice be to those people?
Motivation is one of these mental things that is critical to performance. There are ways you can improve motivation without really a whole lot, actually. The first way is to find training partners. If somebody's going to meet you, at 6 o'clock in the morning on the corner for a run, you're probably going to get up and be out there at 6 o'clock to meet them and go for a run. Whereas if you didn't have a partner, there's a good chance you might decide to sleep in and the heck with it. I'm doing okay. I don't need to run after all. So that's like number one. That's the most important thing you can do if you're low on motivation is to have a training partner. And that doesn't cost you any money at all. The second thing is it actually costs you some money. Second best way of getting motivated is to hire a coach. If you're paying somebody to prepare workouts and training for you, somebody's going to check in on you periodically to see how you're doing. You don't really want to report back that you've been skipping workouts. You're going to get out there and do the workout. You're paying for this, you're going to do it. So that's the second best way, but it costs you some money to have a coach, but it's also very effective for performance also. Then things start becoming less significant, but they still kind of work. Like, for example, let's say that you're going to do a run the next morning all by yourself, and you're going to get up and you're going to start early, 6 a.m. or something like that. You're going to be out the door for a run. So what can you do to kind of prepare for that motivationally? But one thing you could do is simply lay out your clothes the night before, have them already figured out what shorts, what top, what shoes, how cold is it going to be? Do I need a jacket? Whatever it may be. Make all those decisions the night before and you have them all laid out. So when you get up in the morning, you don't have to go through this whole rigmarole of what should I wear. You've already got it there. And so you can just put it on and you go out the door. Another one I've used with athletes too to help them with motivation is if you just aren't motivated, you get up and you say, I really don't feel like going for a workout today. Just say to yourself, I'll only do 5 minutes. I'll just do 5 minutes and I'll come back home. So you go outside, you start your bike ride or run or whatever it may be. And if at the end of 5 minutes you still feel the same way, come on back, call it quits. But usually what happens at the end of 5 minutes is you start to feel pretty good. It's not so bad after all, so you keep on going. And so that's one of those little things, again, there's just all these little things that you can do. But the biggest one is have a training partner. Right? That's number one. I would suggest that highly, a training partner. So anyway, there's lots of ways you can get around motivation. They're kind of backdoors-ish. They're not really directly aiming at trying to change your motivation. They're just trying to change the things that affect your motivation. But over time, I found that athletes adapt to being able to meet somebody on the corner at 6 a.m. to go for a run, or having their clothes laid out, or hiring a coach, whatever it would be. And that begins to have an effect on their consistency in training, and they start being much more consistent in getting out the door and getting their workouts done.
In that same vein, how do you address common challenges such as overtraining, injury prevention, and mental fatigue in the context of triathlon training? For example, I have somebody who I work with who refuses to do the simple workouts, but yet she'll do an hour and a half, 2 hours of strength training, right? So how do you get people to to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, you bring up the subject of overtraining. This is actually a two-sided coin. What you described as somebody who is not overtraining at all, they're undertraining. What I usually run into with athletes when we start talking about these subjects is that they want to do more. And I've coached many athletes over the years who I had to tell them to back off, quit doing so much. And it's difficult for them to do because they see that as being the method by which they're going to become much better athletes. But there are also athletes who don't really overtrain. They simply don't rest enough. They've got too much stress in their lives. And this can lead to a lot of complications in many areas throughout their lives. For example, one of the things that I'm always concerned about with the athletes I've coached is how much sleep they get. That's a big issue for me. And so athletes typically, if they've got a lot of lives, triathletes are some of the busiest people in the world of sport. They've typically got way too many things in their lives, trying to excel at 3 sports besides. And so we've got to talk about things about, you've got to get more sleep. You're not getting enough sleep because you just got too much stuff going on. So we need to figure out what we can cut out of your lifestyle. In fact, when I tell athletes this, I tell them when I first start with them that there's really, if we're going to work together, you can really only have 3 things in your life. The athletes who come to me for coaching don't come to me to see if they can finish a sprint triathlon. That's not the athletes I get. I get athletes who want to qualify for Ironman Hawaii, or they want to be on the podium in the national championship, or they got some gigantic goal. They got a really high goal, something that's going to stretch them to their limits. They can only have 3 things in their life. I tell them you can have your family. We're not going to give up on your family. You can have your career and you can have training, but you really can't have anything else because this goal is just too big to have anything else. But the athlete says, well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to volunteer to be on my community's HOA. I haven't done anything for the community in a long time. I think it'd be good for me to do that. Well, I like this. I'd say that's a great idea. Why don't you wait till after you've qualified for Hawaii or been on the podium, whatever it is your goal is, and then let's do that. In the meantime, let's focus on, family, career, and training. So you can actually qualify for Hawaii and pull off that gigantic goal. So, and there's all kinds of other stuff that people want to do. And I have to talk people out of these things because I'm not doing this because I want to make their lives more difficult or take away things they like. I'm doing it because they have to sleep. And triathletes are among the worst when it comes to in endurance sports for sleeping. Probably the best for cyclists. They tend to really watch their sleep and they tend to get enough. But triathletes trying to get in 2 sports typically every day, 2 workouts every day, plus everything else in their lives, they don't get enough sleep because that's the only thing they can figure out to cut back on to make sure they get everything done that they want to get done during the day and get in 2 workouts.
Yeah.
So I'll go to bed 11 o'clock p.m. and I've got a swim workout at 5:30 a.m. So I'll get up at 5 a.m. and I'll get maybe 6 hours of sleep for the night. And that's just not going to work. So that's the sort of things that it's really a physical thing, but it really helps them mentally also because they start becoming adept at going out for hard workouts, quality workouts, when it's time to do quality workouts. They start doing a lot better. They begin to realize that that's what was holding them back was the fact they had too many things going on in their daily life. So that's my pet peeve with all athletes is just not enough sleep.
Good, thank you. And another question about the evolution of technology and sports science. How do you see the landscape of triathlon training evolving in the coming years?
Yeah, give you just a quick overview of history of all the technology in sport. My endurance training goes way back to the 1960s, actually, when I was in college. And we didn't even have stopwatches in those days on your wrists. The coach had a stopwatch on a lanyard around his neck. There were never female coaches, so it was always around his neck. And nobody else knew what their times were when you're running intervals, for example. Only the coach knew, and he would tell you that it wasn't fast enough, you had to run faster. And that was like, it's about 1971, we got, I think it was a Casio stopwatch. The Japanese wristwatch, they had a built-in stopwatch, which is the first time ever we'd had that. It was like a mind-blowing situation to realize you could look at your own watch and know how fast you were running. So that was a break-in. That's like 1971. The next breakthrough doesn't occur until 1977. The heart rate monitor is invented. So we go through 6 years where nothing happens in terms of technology, and all of a sudden we now got heart rate monitors, which we didn't have before that. But now what we're seeing is new technology coming out on almost a monthly basis. There's something new coming out all the time. It's hard to even keep up with all of it. I expect we're going to see a new product here in this year sometime. It'll be called continuous lactate monitoring. Right now, we've got lots of athletes who are following the Norwegian way of training, which involves pricking your finger to take a drop of blood to see what your lactate levels are. And they've got a device they can do that with, but it's not the sort of thing you do in a few seconds. It's the sort of thing you do once or twice a workout, maybe, or even a few times a week, but you just don't do it frequently. You don't do it all the time, although I know one person who does. And so what we're going to have is we're going to have this device that will stick on your arm and have a little bitty needle that goes beneath the skin into this interstitial space beneath the skin. And that will measure lactate, and it'll tell you on your wristwatch or on your phone. I'm not sure which way it's going to come out originally, but you'll have on a device what your lactate level is right now, at this moment. What is your lactate right now? And you'll see it throughout the entire workout, the bike or the run, or perhaps even the swim. I'm not sure if it'll work in swimming right away underwater. But we're going to have that soon. So we're now to the point where we're seeing things that were unimaginable even just a few years ago. Mm-hmm. So the world has changed dramatically, and this is in the world of sport. And this is probably the biggest change for all of us is all the technology that we now have available to us. Sometimes I think we're overwhelmed with technology. Too much stuff to look at, too many things to think about, too many numbers.
Yeah, totally. And I know that you also individually coach, but you also have training programs on Training Peaks. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. On Training Peaks, there's one of the subsets you can go to, one of the sites you can go to on Training Peaks lists coaches and all the training plans they have, and there are literally thousands and thousands of plans out there. So you can sometimes find things which are somewhat difficult to find, like what about aqua bike races, where you swim and then bike, and then swim again, or whatever the sport may be. And you can probably find that. I've never looked, but you can probably find that someplace on Training Peaks. You can find a plan which prepares you for an aqua bike race, or obviously things like triathlon. You can find all kinds of triathlon plans. There may not be very many aqua bike plans, but I will guarantee you there are thousands and thousands of triathlon plans designed by, in the most case, really, really smart coaches. And they've laid out things you can do to prepare for your race. The downside of training plans, obviously, is that they're not designed for you. They're designed for somebody who is, in general, close to who you are. May not be exactly the same physiology, etc. But similar. You can probably find plans like that. So that's what I do with my plans. Is I have, for example, plans for over 50 aged athletes and under 50 age athletes. And I have plans that are designed around training for an Ironman or an Olympic distance race, whatever it may be. And I've got plans for advanced athletes who are podium bound, or plans for intermediate athletes, or plans for athletes who just want to finish the race. And so you can find all kinds of things. I've got various scales athletes can use with their plans. They can use what I call a 5-2 plan, which is polarized plan, which is 5 easy days a week and 2 hard days a week. So it's an 80-20 concept. Or you can train on a pyramidal plan, which is something more like 4-3. So 4 easy days a week and 3 hard days a week. So there are all kinds of options, and it becomes, after a while, it's almost overwhelming because of all the options you get available to you. And I'm not the only one doing that. Other coaches are doing that too, which multiplies all the plans available by 100. So if you're not sure how to train for a triathlon of any distance, you can go online to Training Peaks, and you can probably find somebody who's going to give you a plan which is probably close to what you need. You may still need to tweak it for your unique needs, but you can find a plan that's going to come really close.
Thank you. And finally, where can people pick up a copy of the Triathlon Training Bible?
Yeah, well, there's lots of places. You can do it, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. It's all the major sites. You can go to my site, which is joefrieltraining.com, and you can see all my books listed there, and you can buy them through that website. So there's lots of ways to get them. They're actually quite available on the internet. You can even go, I'm sure, to a shop in town. If you've got a Barnes & Noble in your town, you can probably find it there also. So it should be easy to come by. I've never found anybody yet said they couldn't find it. But so I'm sure it can be found.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. As I mentioned earlier, you've always been a hero of mine, so I really appreciate you being on the show. I also want to thank our sponsors once more, Play Try, Swim Bike Run, a retail bike shop and multi-sport specialist. For more information, visit playtrystore.com. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. If you want more information on this show or any other show, visit hilarytopper.com or find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Alexa, you name it, we're out there. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.